Right, we have The Thing from Another World. Um, a so-so adaptation. All right, so this, if you don't know the history of this, of The Thing, um, this was a adaptation of, I believe it was Who Goes There from the 1930s. And they said, hey, we don't have the budget nor the technology to actually do this stuff. So let's just turn the thing, which was a shape-shifting alien that can look like anybody. Instead, let's change that into pretty much like a Frankenstein type monster, because they didn't have the resources to actually do that. And they also thought, like, well, no one's going to want to see that, because during the early 50s when this came out, monster stuff was kind of what people wanted. And they were like, okay, well, we can't do this type of stuff. So let's just make it, a like Frankenstein monster. And I think from an adaptation point of view, this feels very, very much like Kubrick's version of The Shining, where it's very vaguely an adaptation. But with that one, it's very different, because Kubrick, being the kind of diva he was like, nope, I'm changing this. And King was like, no, I don't want you to do that. And Kubrick was like, too bad. Well, with this, it was like we want to do this, but we can't. So we got to kind of, change it because we can't do it. They actually like physically and with budget and technology, they actually couldn't do it until 82 when Carpenter made it. And that's a more accurate depiction of the actual, I think it was novella. But what we have here is scientists and I believe Air Force officials. They're at outpost, and they come across this alien organism, and then it gets loose, and then they have to basically fend it off. And so this was kind of similar to then what a couple years later with something like War of the Worlds did, where it was like, okay, it's aliens, and we must fight against them. The whole paranoia type stuff is pretty much gone, because there's no, it's not a shape-shifting alien that looks like anybody. It's a Frankenstein type monster that can't do those things. So it felt very much like we gotta kind of like fight against the monster, against the creature. Now, I'm not going to penalize this for not being close as an adaptation because of what I said. So I'm going to look at this from just a standard movie. This, for the most part, still holds up. As a monster movie, it still holds up, because what they do, I think, pretty well is much like later versions. They take the time to establish, like, okay, what is this kind of alien thing? Okay, we don't know. That's why we're here, in this remote Arctic outpost to like do this kind of stuff. And something that I also do like is the fact that they're scientists. They're not like your typical kind of suburban resident, who necessarily don't have like degrees in science, or maybe didn't go into the military, where with this one it is. And so they're not making dumb decisions, something that the Thing prequel does. That's a little irritating, but that's totally different. So they establish that, like, these are scientists, and they're actually smart. They're not going by the the horror rule book of, okay, we got to be dumb. They're actually smart, and so it's pretty nice to see, like, back in the 50s, that these are still people that, who are dealing with something not of this planet, and they're being, professional. They're kind of remaining calm a little bit and trying to deal with whatever this thing is. And they also understand, like, well, if we kill this thing, we probably just, destroyed something brand new. And it's just like, yeah, well, sometimes that's not a good thing. Maybe you don't want that new thing. So I still think this movie works. It still works from a, adaptation point of view. It's not totally accurate, but I give it a pass because they actually couldn't do it. It's not like they refused to. It's that they couldn't do it. And, I think this does a pretty good job in the fact that it is helped penned by Howard Hawks, who, at the time just did, he was a genre guy. He made, like, action stuff. He made romance, he made drama, and then he was diving into horror. And so this guy, like, went all over the place. And, for, like, a lot of different filmmakers, like, growing up in the 60s and 70s, much like John Carpenter, grew up with his stuff. And so when they eventually made the 82 version, Carpenter was like, I understand that they couldn't do any of this stuff, so we can actually do this stuff now. And so, and it just sucks how after the 82 thing came out, it was just lampooned. It was just dogpiled on, and then people were just like, nope, this is not what we want. And people were saying, like, oh, this one's superior. And it's like, well, because they were making a more accurate version of the story. They weren't trying to recreate this. They were trying to recreate the actual novella. And yeah, and also something else that they do change about this one is there's nobody in here is named their, counterpart in the novella. Like, there's no McCready, there's no Blair, there's no, like, Gary, there's nobody like that. And another thing too is that I like the introduction of female in here, because in the novella and then the 82 movie, it's a sausage hut. I'm just gonna say it's a sausage hut outpost. It's just all guys. There's no women in here. So this movie said, well, much like horror movies coming out today, we got to have women, and they say, hey, okay, she's smart, and she's not just there to just scream and scream her ass off. Like, it's actually, like, professional. And it's like, all right. And this was in the 50s, and so it really was kind of cool to see that, in the 50s, because then once, like, the 80s came about, it was just a bunch of, oh, no, you can scream well and you're going to die. And so, professional roles were very much non-existent for women. And it was really cool to see something like this, in the 50s. So all in all, this works for the most part. If you know that this is supposed to be like an adaptation of novella, you're not going to get it. Okay. You're going to get just a Frankenstein monster movie and them kind of trying to save the day. So I think if you can try to remove yourself away from that and look at this as its own thing, but if you can't, understand that, they couldn't do it because they couldn't do it. And so I personally give this a grade. And I saw this actually when I was kind of a kid. I saw like bits of this. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then realizing later how big it was, I was like, all right, cool. So I would give this a grade. It's really good. It still holds up, but I think it's something where it's like, all right, if you're gonna watch the thing, probably watch the 82 movie.